It's a Guy Jeans podcast.
My next guest is Dave Stewart from the Wet Fly Swing podcast. If you guys have never listened to the Wet Fly Swing podcast, go to wetflyswing.com and check out everything that Dave has to offer. He has almost 500 episodes of all kinds of people from all over the country, all about fly fishing, where to go, techniques, tricks, all that kind of stuff. You guys have got to check his podcast out. It's pretty awesome. On this podcast, we talk about Dave and growing up in the Oregon area and all the rivers that he fishes, including the Deschutes for steelhead. We talk about steelhead fly fishing techniques and what they do over there on the Deschutes. We also talk about his business and podcasting and what it takes to be a podcaster, and give some great advice for podcasting and just starting out with the podcast. So without further ado, Mr. Dave Stewart. Good. How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great, man. I'm glad you were able to put this together. It's been a while.
Yeah. Last time I was on your podcast, I think maybe a year ago or so. I'm not sure. Can you remember how long ago that was?
I don't have it right in front of me, but I think it was something like that. Yeah, I think it was 22 for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for being on my podcast, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I've been following you out there, and I'm just looking at it now. I think it was Kern River Fly Fishing with Guy G. It was May 31st, 2020. Yeah, so it's been over a year, 2022.
Wow, crazy, man. How time flies, huh?
Yep.
Dude, I'm going to ask you, about your, fly fishing history and stuff like that. But I also want to get into business and podcasting and all that, because you're an inspiration for sure. But let's talk about like your childhood. Were you raised in a fly shop?
Yeah. So I started out back in the day. This goes way back. My dad had a shop. Actually, before I was born, he started in the garage, one of those stores.
Oh, no way.
By the time I was, a little kid, I think he opened in 75. And so I grew up around the shop, pretty much that's where I lived. If I wasn't at home or playing baseball, I was at the shop tying flies and that was years, I was in that shop. And eventually, during the remember the 2008, the shop closed up during that period of time when a lot of the businesses went down. And from there, I eventually got into this thing I'm doing now, which I can tell you more about that as well.
Dude, my little girls, my daughters grew up in the fly shop, like a crib right by the cash register,
Same thing.
Yeah, for sure, man. So were you
That's
tying
cool.
flies as a little kid?
Yeah, I mean,
No way.
pretty much we were, we've got photos of me sitting there at the sportsman shows, sitting there tying flies when I was probably 5 or 6, just right in front of all the, you know what I mean? It's kind of funny to think now, because my kids aren't quite as, they tie flies, but I don't think they're quite at the level I was at when I was like 7 or 8 or whatever. But man, I've been tying my whole life. Fly tying is one of those things where I tied commercially for, my dad for a long time, and I just kind of got burnt out from it. So I don't tie that much anymore. So I'm more fishing now, but yeah, I still love tying the occasional fly.
Was that in Oregon?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you grew up fishing the Deschutes, and then probably were you trout fishing or steelhead fishing up there?
Yep. Yeah, a little both. Yeah, the shop was actually just on the outskirts of Portland. So it was one of the earliest fly shops. It might have been the first fly shop in Portland. I can't remember, but yeah, It was just a perfect timing. And then, so my dad would do trips on the Deschutes a lot. So we would, pretty much every summer times I would be out in the river all summer, just fishing, helping my dad with guiding and stuff. And I pretty much grew up on the Deschutes, steelhead and trout.
How long did your dad have a fly shop in Portland, and what was the name of it?
It was called, the original name was Stewart Custom Tackle. So way back in the day, I think when he opened it, 75, whatever, it was Stewart Custom Tackle. Eventually he changed it to Stewart's Fly Shop. And It was just a little tiny fly shop on the outskirts. But yeah, I think, 75 through, I want to say, gosh, it was probably open for 35, 40 years, something like that.
Wow, man. That's crazy. Yeah, I'm going with my fly shop. I'm going on 21 years. So, man, having one for 40 years, that's a long time, man, for sure.
Yeah. 20 years is a lot too. Yeah.
So tell me about the Deschutes, man. Is that your like fishery that you grew up fishing, or did you fish around Portland?
Yeah, we pretty much everything. I mean, the Deschutes was really cool for those that don't know the Deschutes. And the nice thing is, Oregon, kind of similar to California and some of these other West Coast streams, is you got this, cascade, these mountain ranges that break up the west from the east side. So, we just hop over from Portland in an hour and a half, and you're on the east side in the desert. Yeah. And the Deschutes is just cutting its way for 200 miles through basically the desert, and it's this amazing tailwater fishery. Yeah. But at the same time, we have lots of waters, on the coast for steelhead, up and down the coast, and even around Portland and Washington. I mean, there's all sorts of these famous rivers that a lot of people have probably heard of for steelhead. So I think west side, it was always steelhead, winter steelhead, and then east side, trout fishing on the Deschutes. And there's a lot of other rivers that people would probably know about around Oregon, but that's pretty much what we did, throughout the year, is guiding in the summers, and then wintertime kind of in the shop.
Where are you now?
I'm actually on the coast, so I'm like 2 hours west of Portland.
Oh, okay.
Just if you go from Portland, go directly west into a little tiny town, kind of in the Nehalem area.
All right.
I live right on the banks of well, not on the banks, but close enough, within a few minutes of kind of a few famous winter steelhead rivers.
Nice, man. My dad lived in McMinnville in the Sheridan area. Do you know that area?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Oh yeah. So I'd go up there and fish the Willamette, I think it was. Yeah.
Yep.
In that zone, and kind of fish all around in there. That was a lot of fun. But dude, I fished I fished the Umpqua, I fished the Mackenzie, the Rogue. The one thing that I haven't done is fish for smallmouth in the lower Umpqua, I think it is.
Yeah.
Have you done that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. The river, I talked about the Deschutes because that's the river I think about a lot, but I mean, the Rogue is definitely one of my favorite, rivers. The Wild and Scenic River section is amazing. And yeah, the Umpqua, of course, the North Umpqua is famous, for steelheading, and the Umpqua itself, a lot of people outside don't know, but it has great bass fishing, like really great smallmouth fishing.
Do the bass get pretty good size in the lower there?
I haven't really gone like specializing in it, so I don't totally know. I mean, I know that we caught some nice fish, but I'm not sure the size, and I'm not even sure who would be a good resource to look at that river, because I know there's a few shops. But I mean, just like smallmouth, I mean, super aggressive and just having fun on a 90, 100-degree day, floating down the river and catching bass left and right is it was more a little bit of a river trip mixed with some bass fishing on the fly. Yeah.
And then there's another one in Oregon, the Grand Ronde. Have you done that?
Yeah, so the Grand Ronde, that one is known for steelhead. I've been in that area and done a little bit of fishing, but really haven't done the wilderness, like the steelhead stuff that goes on over there. Yeah. That's the trip I would be doing if I was setting one up. I'd do a float trip down the Grand Ronde and hit the steelhead in the right time.
It's crazy, man, how many rivers there are in that area.
I know. I forget about it because you guys, I mean, where you're at too, I mean, really, well, I tell you what, doing this podcast, now that we've done like 500 episodes, we're pretty close to coming up on that. Yeah. I mean, I've had episodes in every state. Right. And I'm realizing that, it doesn't matter what state it is. It could be, you name it, Indiana, there's going to be some fishing. And I think that's what's exciting for me, because although I love steelhead fishing in Oregon, I mean, there's all these other places that we love. In fact, I'm setting up a trip right now to the Great Lakes to fish for steelhead out of Lake Erie. So even though they're a West Coast species, the Great Lakes is an amazing resource for steelheading.
That's what I hear, man. I wanted to ask you a question about the Deschutes too. I remember I was trying out for Team USA in the town there that's kind of by Maupin, Bend, Oregon. Bend. And they had us fishing the Crooked River, which I thought was awesome. Yeah. They had us fishing a couple of lakes, East Lake and another lake over there. And then what was the other one that's right there? There's another river that's right through there.
Another lake?
Another river that was
river. There's the Metolius.
Metolius. Yeah, it was awesome, man. Just in that zone right there, it was just unbelievable. But
you just named the three. You just named the three rivers that make up the Deschutes: the Metolius, the Crooked River, and Deschutes, Upper Deschutes, all come together to make the main stem to Deschutes.
Oh, is that right? So I remember that we went down and fished the Deschutes, just on our own, and I remember hearing something like, "You can't fish while floating," or something like that. Is that right? Is that true?
That's right. Yeah, so the Deschutes is one of those rivers. There's not, I don't know how many there are in the country, but there's no floating out of a boat, any sort of a boat. And I don't know the whole history, but basically it started because, there's a lot of opportunities for steelhead especially, but trout as well, where if you had a boat, you could just basically target those fish, and
right,
it would be lights out, and people still kind of do it. Like some of the gear guys that have, I don't know if you ever heard of side planers, but they have these things, they're like plastic gear things that basically swim out in the middle of the river, and they keep your bait right in the line of where steelhead are migrating up, so there's still, even though you can't fish out of a boat, there's some tools you can use to still get there. But yeah, I think it's more of just the pressure of the Deschutes, and it was somebody. I should do a whole story on how that happened because it's really interesting. But I do believe, and a lot of people do think, it's a very important regulation that has kept the Deschutes what it is.
And then I had heard something about like the guides. I guess there are all tribal members or something. Is that how that works?
Well, in the upper, yeah. So the cool thing about the Deschutes is it has there's a big tribal influence, especially in the upper river. So the Warm Springs Reservation is in the upper part of the Deschutes. So they own a lot of land, and there are certain sections that are tribal only. So you have to buy a tribal permit or license to fish it.
That's crazy.
Or in some areas get a guide. I think you can't even fish it without a guide. So like that middle section, if you float it, you can fish. One side of the river is public, the other side is Warm Springs. So you can't fish one side for a section of mileage.
That's crazy. That's interesting. So when do the steelhead come in on the Deschutes?
So they come in, pretty much right now as we're talking, it's August, we're getting close to September. This is prime time, typically prime time for steelhead. You can start earlier, in the summer. So July, you can definitely catch steelhead, even into June, some of those periods. And summer steelhead, what makes them unique is they're here for a lot longer in the freshwater than, say, a winter steelhead is, right? So those fish are coming out quick out of the ocean. They're getting ready to spawn, and they're just, boom, they're in it. And so for summer steelhead, they come in, like we said, June, July, early summer, and then they're there all year long until the next year. Then they're getting ready to spawn. So these fish, you can catch them, starting, like I said, June, July. It peaks right August, September, October is prime time, November, December. As you turn around, you get in January, February, you start getting that period where they're starting to get ready and they've been in the river a long time. You probably don't want to be doing a lot of fishing for them. You know what I mean? So it's more the peak times are really, I really love July, August, September, October, November. That's the prime for the Deschutes.
And are those fish are coming all the way from like the Columbia? Or they come in from the Columbia like that?
Yep. If you look at the Columbia Basin, which is this massive river, the size of, I'm not even sure how it compares, but 500,000 CFS or whatever it is. It's just this big river, and it's got all these big tribs. So right, it's got these famous rivers. The Deschutes is a lower trib. It's up, river mile, whatever that is. I'm trying to think now, hundreds of miles up to the Columbia, but it's still, you got the Deschutes, you got all these rivers, the Klickitats across there. If you go up a river higher, you get into the Clearwater in Idaho. You get into all these, the upper Columbia where they're swinging flies in the upper basin above some of the big dams and things. So it's this big river that's got, that's whatever it is, thousands of miles long with all this. But the Deschutes is a lower, I consider a lower tributary, at least one. It's one of the first ones when you hit the desert, you see the Deschutes flowing into the Columbia.
When you're fishing for steelhead, are you swinging flies, or how do you guys fish for them in the Deschutes?
Yep. On the Deschutes, it's pretty much all a swing game. So, basically 12, 13 foot rods, 6-7 weight, out there, really simple, get a Scandi or a Skagit head, a line that swings good on the surface, and, downstream and across, work the runs. It's a really pretty simple way to fish. It's more about knowing where the fish are. Yeah. So that's the bigger part of it. Yeah. But it is a swing game.
And that's the name of your podcast.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Well, that's how the podcast started. So the Wet Fly Swing, I wanted to, I was kind of more like tradition, like old school, because you think about it, a lot of people don't talk about swinging flies for trout, right? It's just the second, it's like the last method anybody thinks about. But I thought of it like I wanted to give a little tradition and throw back to my dad and everybody else. And, wet fly swing is an old school way, but for steelhead, it's still super, anybody that swung up a steelhead on a fly on the surface will tell you it's pretty amazing experience.
So for those that don't know, can you just kind of explain how you swing flies real quick? Because there's a lot of people that don't know what that is.
Yeah. So, and you can do this for trout. You can do this for lots of species. But steelhead is one that it's well known. And actually in the Great Lakes, this trip we're setting up over to Lake Erie, we're swinging flies there, which a lot of people didn't think you could swing flies for those steelhead for many years. But now it's obviously been proven you can swing up these, like in December, you can still swing fish on the fly. In those cold temperatures, they're still going to take a movement to hit the fly. But the cool thing about the Deschutes is, like I said, it's in the desert. So the water temperatures are warmer. You're sitting out there sometimes, it's going to be like 95 degrees. You're in your shorts swinging for these big, giant steelhead. Yeah, so it's really cool. But so the water temperatures are warm. Because they're warmer, the fish are more active. So you don't have to get down on the bottom like you would for a winter steelhead. So there you do need to get down to their level because they're not moving as much. But these summer steelhead are so active that you could swing a fly and it'll go over the top of them, and they'll see it, and they'll come out of their holding spot down below and come up to hit it, or even check it out, right, or bump it, tip it, tap it.
Yeah.
So what you do is you get your gear. So once you get your gear, like I said, Skadger, Scandi line, you get your spay rod, and you find your water, and basically it's just downstream and across. So you find a spot where you think there's going to be fish, and you get your length of the line where you think you can cover the water, and you make a comfortable cast, and you cast out at a 45-degree down and across and let it swing. And you just hold on and keep your rod tip kind of pointed towards your fly. And as it swings down below you, you let it on the hang down for a second. And sometimes you'll get a hit as your fly's hanging down below you. Mm-hmm. And you let it sit there a few seconds, maybe give it a little tug or kind of a pull just to see if a fish will take it. If not, you take a step or two downstream, depending on how much water you're covering and how, if you think you're in the bucket, take the same exact cast, make it again, swing it down, same thing, and you do that over and over and over again, sometimes for an hour or more on a run. And if you get some feedback, which could be a fish tapping it or tipping it, or maybe a hook up, or maybe you had a fish on, then you found a bucket. And that's the cool thing about steelhead, because once you find the bucket on a lot of these streams, you know that even though you're fishing a section that's maybe 100 yards long, you found one little bucket within that run to target. So next time you come down, I'm starting up above that run, that bucket, plenty of times, so I know I can swing right into it, and I know where I hooked fish. And so that's the name of the game, is just it's almost meditative, I think, like you said. It's like you get in this zone where you're just that's the way I feel it. You're not thinking about much else, or maybe you are, but it's really when you get a fish that tips it or taps it, you're on it, and you're like in that zone.
And the flies you guys use, they're usually like purples and pinks and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. What is that all about?
Yeah, so there's a mix of flies we use. So, purples and pinks, I think, there's some of it is just they're remembering the salt, right? All those creatures and, critters they're eating in salt water while they're living. And especially for winter steelhead, right? If you're right along the coast and these fish are turned in, you're going to be using some pinks and all that stuff. But for colors in freshwater, they've been in the river longer. We're using stuff actually on the Deschutes that's a little more buggy-like than it is kind of big and giant. You can, especially daytime. We had Tom Larimer on a while back, and he talked about, these flies they use during the daytime when the sun's on the water. There's a whole discussion there. We could talk about that when the sun's in their eyes and what you use. But if you're fishing early morning when the sun's off the water, or evening, at least on the Deschutes, we use really small stuff. Like, it almost looks like a trout fly.
Okay.
It's traditional steelhead. So go look at, say, a greenbutt skunk or a freight train, or any of these famous traditional wet flies. Yeah. And that's what we're using. They're wet flies for steelhead. They're basically size 6, size 8, maybe even size 10 for the most part, and they're really sparse. Okay. It's got a little body, a little hackle, a little wing. Other than that, maybe a little flash, a couple strands of crystal flash. Other than that, it's like you don't want to be super gaudy, at least, fishing those times. You want to get small, because those fish, they can see really well, and they're trout, right? Because the steelhead is a rainbow trout, and they remember that, especially as they get into the freshwater. The longer they're in there, the more they become trout-like. Yeah.
So are you guys nymphing for them sometimes too, or maybe even throwing dries?
Yeah, we don't. So definitely dries. That's a big thing.
I bet. Yeah.
A lot of people do. We don't do a lot of nymphing. I think the Deschutes is one of those places. It's just swinging is like the ultimate. So occasionally you'll see some nymphers. I've nymphed a lot for winter steelhead on the coast, and it works great. Yeah. With egg patterns and stuff, or stone flies. But when I get to the Deschutes, it's all wet flies, and I don't do a lot of the dry fly stuff. I know there's some guys we've had on that that's all they do is dry flies on the surface. And it works. It's like anything though. It's going to take you more casts. You got to cover more water to get that one fish. And I'm always a little bit more than numbers. I like to get a lot, more fish on the swing.
So when you guys are fishing, are you guys getting, a lot of fish, or is it just, one fish or sometimes no fish? Because you hear steelhead guys say, oh, it's a fish of 1,000 casts or whatever, It
is. It might even be to 10,000 now because the runs are so low. Yeah. Because we have had a big downturn in the last few years with the steelhead around the whole Pacific Rim, all the way up, but I think it's rebounding and they're on their way back. So yeah, it depends on the year. I mean, we definitely have had times where you would go out there and, you could easily hook 5 to 10 fish in one session in a morning, or evening. I think for steelhead, just in general, if you get a fish, if you hook on a fish, you land a fish, you get an opportunity. I feel like that's pretty good. It's all expectations. You know what I mean? I think you talk to your guide or you talk to your shop and you ask them what they think. But for the most part, for steelhead, if I get one fish in a session, I'm pretty happy. But that's to say, I've also had lots of days where I've caught, we've had trips where we've caught 50, on a trip, on a multi-day trip. So I understand people that are getting into it that are new, that want to do the numbers. It's tough. The numbers right now is tough just because the numbers are down, but it is doable to catch more than one per session.
Yeah. Some people probably go and expect they're going to catch a whole bunch, and it's just not that way, huh?
No, it's not like trout. It's definitely not like trout. You don't just get in a spot and just start nailing fish left and right. It's really, you got to put your time in. If you don't know where the fish are, it's just put your time in to find the fish first. And then once you find them, you got to kind of find your spot. But, that's why I always recommend, you probably as well, right? The guiding is, if you want to decrease the learning curve, get a guide for at least a day. For sure. They'll take you to at least some water. They'll teach you. And that's what I always recommend.
Absolutely. Okay, so tell me about starting your podcast and how that all went down. I think you said it was like 2017 or something you started, and and kind of progressed through what happened and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So the podcast was, this amazing thing. I had been doing lots of stuff online, in kind of the marketing space, and just nothing was working that great. All right. And I wasn't really that passionate about it. And a good example was I started actually the Wet Fly Swing blog 2 years before the podcast. And I was trying to do some blogging and marketing. Right. And, I just wasn't into it. I didn't love the writing. It wasn't great. But I had been listening to these podcasts, all these business podcasts. And I loved listening to podcasts for years, even before that. Yeah. And in 2015, I just set a goal. I said, you know what? I'm going to start my own podcast within 2 years. And I had no idea what it was going to be in. I just set that goal. And I said, I'm going to do it. And then, come December 2017, it just all came together. And I had set a plan up to start this Wet Fly Swing podcast. And the cool thing was, as soon as I launched it, literally on day one, it was the first time ever online somebody reached out to me, some stranger, and just said, Dave, this is awesome. Keep doing it.
Awesome.
You know what I mean?
That's all you need.
And so that's all I needed. I was like, wow, that didn't happen in years of everything else. So I knew I had something. And after that, I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to be consistent and do this every week for as long as I need to. And I'm just going to see what happens. And we haven't missed a week since 2017.
That's crazy. Yeah, and people have no idea that that's actually a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot.
For sure. And you have almost 500 episodes?
Yeah, we're going to hit 500. 500 every 100 episodes. I do a big episode, which is like a celebration episode to celebrate. And this one, I'm not even going to announce who it is because it's so huge. The person that's coming on, but all I got to say is catch 500 because, as far as I'm concerned, this could be the president of the United States. That's how big it is.
Awesome, man. So what gear did you start with, and then what gear are you using now?
Yeah. Love that. This is so great because it's always the big question. Like, okay, you're starting a podcast, right. It seems like so much, but really it's not. When I started, I can't remember exactly now. I've got tons of microphones and all this equipment, but you can literally start with, I think I had a MacBook Pro. I had a microphone. I went out and bought I think it was the ATR, the ATR 2100 from, I'm trying to think of the brand, but the Samsung Q2U is another great microphone we recommend. But it was that type of microphone. So $60, you can buy a professional microphone. So we got that. the microphone plugged into the USB, and I think then we were doing it on what were we using? I don't think we were using Zoom. Maybe we were using. I can't remember the exact tech that we used, but I can talk about what we're doing now, which is really actually working a lot better. But like you use the Rodecaster Pro is a great device. It costs some money, but if you want to spend some money, I think the Rodecaster Pro is probably the best thing, one of the best things you can buy for recording.
Awesome.
But yeah, for now. So now we've upgraded a little bit. I use a device that I love to share with people. If you really want to up your game, it's just like the Rodecaster Pro. It's a Zoom PodTrack P4. So basically, it does everything. Well, almost everything the Podcaster, the Rode does, but it's portable. Literally, you can put it in your pocket.
What's it called?
It's called a Zoom PodTrack P4.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So you go on the road.
If you're on the road, exactly. And I'm going on the road right now. I'm leaving for a trip, and I'm bringing it with me in the suitcase. I'm going to have some mics so we can do some stuff on the road. But so that's what we do now. I also record like we're doing. This is a double ender, so I'm recording this into my Zoom, so I'll give it to you, so the audio will be great.
Yeah.
But I think when I'm doing regular recordings, I use this software, and then I record into our host. Actually has a new program which lets us record, which is shout out to Libsyn. Libsyn's our hosting company, and they just do an awesome job. So that's what we do now for actually getting our guests audio.
So is this your full-time job now?
Yeah, well, it's the full. Yeah, I mean, it's as far as revenue. I mean, I've got some other stuff going. We have another business kind of in the travel space. I have another I do some website stuff as well. And I have another podcast. I have two other podcasts I do.
Do you?
So yeah. So I have a marketing podcast I do, and then I have a family podcast I do, which I interview family members.
Oh my God!
Yes,
you're busy.
So
man.
I've got a team. I've got four editors that are just basically all doing editing, right? So that's what they do. Yeah. Oh,
that's so cool. So is your podcast like one of the largest in the country, you think?
Yeah, it's hard to tell the exact numbers, but for sure, when you look at Orvis, Tom Rosenbauer, I mean, he's been around since the beginning. I'm sure he's probably still the largest, and there's some other ones that are really big, but as far as the independent podcasts like we are, I think our numbers have put us, definitely towards the top. I don't have the exact number. It's hard to tell exactly, but yeah, we get about, we're pretty close to like 100,000 downloads per month.
That's crazy, man. That's so amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So why do you think your podcast is so successful?
I think, the big reason is, and this is for anybody out there that ever wants to start a podcast, because at the time when we started, I felt like I was late to the game in 2017, which we weren't. And I don't think somebody now is late to the game either. I think if you want to start a podcast in anything, start it.
Yeah.
And, you build a community. But I think we've been consistent. Like I said, we haven't missed a week. That's very important. Our listeners, we just been building this audience over the last 5 years, and I've been asking them what they want to hear. I've been trying to engage with them as much as possible. So I think that's a big part of it. And then also bringing on great guests. You can't, that's a big part. When I started out, I was trying to get the biggest guests I could imagine. And even now, like I said, at 500, there's going to be no guests we've had, and we've had some big guests on, but I guarantee you 500 will be our biggest guest ever. So I'm still always trying to think, like, who else can we get? Like,
awesome.
I had the Fonz. I don't know how old you are, but we had the Henry Winkler on the Fonz back.
Of course.
Back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
man.
I'm always trying to reach out to that because I feel like it's just fun for me to do those. So I don't stick with just tips and tricks, although I think a lot of our listeners love that. But again, I always think of our listeners. Start there first. If you serve your listener, I think you're going to be successful.
How do you prepare for each podcast? Do you really research your person that you're going to interview, or how do you do that?
That's something, again, I'm always evolving this stuff, always tweaking it. But right now I do enough just to get ready, because I actually love being surprised a little bit on the podcast.
Sure.
So what I do is typically the typical flow is I'll have a guest, I know they're coming. I will say, okay, I'm going to make sure to do a little research, whether that's social media, do some Googling, get some, high level topics. Then I try to have an arc for the show.
Yeah.
Like it was you, like Guy, when you had yours, it was episode 325.
Yeah.
So when we had you on back in back in May. It went live in May 22. The title for that episode was Kern River Fly Fishing with Guy Jeans. And I had, the Squalla Hatch, Goldens, right? So I try to always have an arc for the show. For you, it was not only get to know you, and your background is amazing too. I mean, the band and everything. I mean, you have this really cool thing going. And it's great music too, by the way. But,
thanks, buddy.
But Kern River. So that was the arc of that show. I was like, all right, if we do nothing else, I'm going to have at least one listener is going to hear this episode and is going to get some value on how to fish the Kern River.
Sure.
And that's where I started that. And then I just let it flow. I think on any podcast, I think the most important thing is to keep it conversational. So I don't have set questions to say, hey, here's 10 questions I want to ask. It's more like, I know it's Guy, I know it's the Kern River, and I'm just going to let my curiosity flow, because on my marketing podcast a couple years ago, I asked the guy who pretty much invented podcasting, did all the NPR podcasts back in the day. And I asked him what was the number one thing that makes a podcaster successful. And he said, curiosity.
Yeah.
Right. Curiosity is the number. As long as you're curious about your topic, you're going to have a good show. And so that's the message, I think, for anybody, is that I'm always curious. Like the Kern River, I've never fished it, but I definitely want to get down there. And so that's how I go about it.
Right on. Who's been some of your favorite guests over the years? Do you have a top three?
God, I wish I could. Who would be? Well, let's just throw off I guess I'll go to those 100 episodes because that makes it easy. So Joan Wolf was huge. Joan Wolf, just because
sweet lady, huh?
Yeah, very sweet. And she was awesome. I think it's just some of the older, because it's just these people. I mean, I think Henry Winkler, because he was a famous movie star, and it's just, It was a really cool story. I mean, on that episode, I asked him, I said, Henry, after we got into it, and we did this on Zoom too, so we were looking face to face as we did this. I said, Henry, so you love fly fishing, you do all this stuff. Why not just retire from all your stuff and just go fly fishing every day? And he said, the reason I don't do that is that right now I'm at the top of my game. Why would I quit right now? Right? Barry, he just won an Emmy a couple years ago for Barry. He says right? He's like, I'm 70 whatever years old, but I'm at the very top, and there's no way I'm retiring right now. I love what I do.
Yeah.
Right.
What a career that guy's had, man.
Yeah. Yeah. He said, I think I'll have to listen to it again, but I think he said during the peak of his happy days, he received, I think, something like 500, maybe it was 100,000 letters per week.
Yeah, I bet, man. I remember I was probably I must have been 7 or 8 years old, and I saw him at the LA airport, and I actually I went up and asked him for an autograph, and he was so cool. He's so cool to me, man.
He's a cool guy.
If I ever interview him, I'm going to tell him about that.
Yeah, you should. Well, he said that too. Yeah, he's very humble, and he loves fishing. And so I think Henry was big. I mean, I had Frank Moore is a big steelhead. You mentioned the Umpqua, the North Umpqua. He's a famous angler in the North Umpqua. He actually passed away recently, but I did that in person, which was really amazing. Shook his hand. Oh, cool. That was cool. Gosh, who else? Joe Humphreys was really cool. I think I always look at the old guy. Yeah, Joe Humphreys. But I mean, everybody, I just name off so many of these amazing episodes. But I kind of start there because I feel like I always love to pay tribute to the people that paved the way before us. I think all those older folks, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. Joe came into my fly shop probably 5 years ago, and it was kind of raining outside, and he came in, and I had met him before in Pennsylvania, but he came in and he was just so cool. And then he borrowed some waders, and then I took him him and his buddy to a spot on the Kern, and they went fishing. I go, yeah, fish here, you guys. Check it out. Then he comes back in the afternoon, and he has a picture of this giant Sacramento pike minnow. No way. And he's like, what is this thing? He's like, he had never seen one before, and he's giant mouth. Yeah. Giant mouth. And he's like, is this kind of a fish that you guys catch here? I'm like, well, they're kind of, they're native to the Kern. And he's all, that was a blast. I thought it was a giant brown trout, and I brought it in. I'm like, what is this thing? Oh, that is cool. Yeah. I love that. And then he sat down in a chair and busted out a bottle of brandy and said, let's have a drink. No way. Yeah. Oh, that is so good. Isn't that cool? Oh man, I love that guy. He's got that story that all the wrestling, he could probably beat you down. He's 95. He could probably still beat down most guys, right? He's that tough. For sure. So what, have you ever had any
difficult podcasts where you're just like, oh my God, pulling teeth kind of a thing? Like,
yes, I have. I've had a few of those. I don't think I've ever not released an episode, but I found that there's been a few, not many, because I mean, usually you just get people talking and they can just go. But
yeah,
I have had a few. I can't remember the numbers or whatever, but the thing I remember, the tip for anybody that runs into that is that whenever I run into somebody, I always feel like if I'm getting bored on the conversation, it's like right now, if you're getting bored, it's time to switch up the topic. And I always find that when I'm doing that, if I'm getting bored listening to the guest, time to switch it. So I'll just like straight up just switch it to some random topic that's on my mind, and that'll help us get out of the funk. Yeah, and then once we're out of the funk, now we're off to a different topic. Who knows what it's about? Maybe it's about cats or something. Yeah. And then he's talking again, or that person's talking again, and now we can kind of keep it flowing. So but I've had a few of those over the years.
So do you probably over the years, like, you feel like you've gotten a lot better, huh? I mean, like from when you first started to, now, and, creating conversation, a lot of people don't realize that it's not easy unless you have the gift of gab, but keeping it real and keeping the conversation going, that's not easy to do.
No, it's not. I don't know what the secret is there. There's probably, I think I have that secret of the energy thing. I always ask, or I occasionally ask people like, hey, at the end of the day, after you've talked to people all day long, say you've done podcasts all day long, are you drained, or do you have more energy? And at the end of the day, I actually have more energy.
Me too.
After I've talked. There you go. So we're the same.
Yeah. It's like a high almost.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you love it. So you're that's why your podcast is successful, right? Because you love it. That's first off, you love the podcasting. Yes. You love talking to people. You love fishing. So it's the perfect fit. I can see why your podcast, like you're loving it because it's great. Yeah.
If you could give any advice to someone starting out on a podcast, what advice would you give them?
Oh, what is the best advice? Well, I said one of them, the first thing would be curious, don't forget about that. And and I guess I've said most of these, but don't plan everything out. It's okay to script it. Like, I actually have questions when I'm doing these. I usually set aside some questions just in case, because if I get stuck, I want to be able to go to those questions and, and prepare. It's good to prepare. You don't want to come into episode not knowing your guests at all. So definitely preparation is good. But when you get into it, my best advice, once you get started, again, we're going past all the technical and all the gear and stuff, but once you're actually doing the interview, the best thing is, like I said, think of it as a conversation and just sit there, just tell your guests, hey, it's like we're at a bar or we're at a coffee shop just chatting about fishing. Like that's it. If you think of it that way, it sets your guest. First of all, your guests, a lot of times they don't know. They're like, oh man, are we getting drilled? What's this going to be like? You got to set up for them, right? To let them know, like, hey, this is just a conversation. Then I always say, hey, we also edit these in post-production. So if there's anything that you say that you want taken out, like, I can do that. Like, let them know. You got to let them know that we're not trying to, you know what I mean? You can imagine in this day and age with all the politics and stuff, people are worried, right? But I am definitely, again, that's another advice, right? It's like guiding. Don't talk about politics or religion, the two things you don't talk about. So I think same thing on the podcast. I don't get into all that stuff. For me, it's about the guest. I want to highlight our guests and make them just tell their story and show everybody how cool they are. And as far as politics, I really think that it doesn't really matter because, like, especially in our space, everybody just loves fly fishing. Yeah. And you could be wherever you're at, and it doesn't even matter. We're chatting about fishing.
So all these interviews you've done, you've found out about all these different places, right? To go fishing and stuff. And so it's kind of like your podcast is also evolved into like you're doing travel stuff or something. Is that right?
Yep.
What's that all about?
Yeah. It's amazing next step. I feel like this is the next big stage of where we're at. And so
that's cool.
We had this podcast, 2017, we launched it, and 2018, going strong, 2019, getting into it. And then I just started realizing, travel, like, I want to get out and check out these places. And I, just started thinking about how do we do this? And it's evolved now into the last few years where we've basically created a travel program. And this is what we call, this is our school of fishing, right? And so we're taking the next step on that too, launching a new website. But essentially what we do is we do these trips around the country. We're starting out basically in North America now, trying to really hit on those places close to home that people of our listeners can drive to, things like that. So we're setting up trips from, what I do is reach out to some of our best guests we've had on, and we ask them, hey, would you like to set up a hosted program where we bring listeners out and then we go fishing with you, and you set up the guides, and then we set up a lodging, and that's what we do. So we're kind of setting up our own travel program. So it's not like we're necessarily going, So we're not really going to. It's not like we're going to all these giant lodges in Alaska, although we will. Right now, we're really setting up these things which are more like Airbnbs, getting chefs, and we're setting up our own program. So it's this kind of unique hybrid approach. So that it allows us to do a trip that doesn't cost $6,000. It's a more reasonable school where you can go for a few days. Still get all the guiding and what you get at these bigger trips, but with not the price tag. So we're finding it's been really successful. People are loving it. And I always thought like, wow, could I do a hosted program? And right now we're kind of building that out, and it's working great. I
had Brian O'Keefe on my podcast, right? And I asked him this question. He's honestly like one of the most well-traveled fly anglers in the world. He's been everywhere. And I asked him, and you'll be surprised at his answer. But I asked him, I go, if you had one last place to go fishing, where would it be?
Let me answer it for you.
Uh-huh.
The answer would be, well, it's one of two because I know he just moved recently, but he would say smallmouth bass fishing.
Exactly. Dude.
Yeah.
He said the Boundary Waters.
The Boundary Waters, which is where he is now. Yeah.
Yeah. And he said the Boundary Waters around Minnesota. And I'm like, no way. Because I'm like, I love smallmouth. And I couldn't believe that. I was like, really, man? All the places you've been. It's pretty crazy. What about you, man? What would be your favorite place to go? If you had one last place to go, where would you go? I'm
a little bit the opposite. And again, the difference is that you're talking to Jeff Currier, who's already got 400 species. Right. So me, I'm not even close. I will never be at Jeff Currier's level, nor will probably all of us. But I want to go. I want to go to like the most exotic place. I want to go everywhere. But if I had to pick one.
Yeah.
It's so hard because, like Africa would be amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You name the species, the Seychelles would be amazing.
Right.
Any of South America, any of, all of the, so I've got a lot to do. I've got a big to-do list.
Yeah.
But I guess to start out easy, the next one I really want to do is probably Atlantic salmon. That's something I haven't done yet. And Atlantic salmon, probably the realistic one for me right now is Atlantic salmon, and I would really like to get them. Again, we got all these issues with populations, and that's one that is pretty spendy if you go to Norway, but there are some places on the east coast of North America that you can get to at a reasonable cost. So that might be our next school we set up. We'll see.
Ooh, that sounds fun, man.
Yeah.
Right on. So if listeners want to listen to your podcast and all that stuff and find all your information, where do they go?
Yeah, so they can go to wetflyswing.com right now, and either there or we have our school program, which the website is it'll probably be live when this goes live. But the schoolofishing.co is our school program. So if they want to check out the trips, but I always recommend just go to the podcast. We got a ton of information. You can search any topic. We also have a transcript player at the bottom, so you can literally search the transcript player and it'll search the keyword and it'll bring you to the exact location in the podcast, so you can listen to it. So we got some couple of good resources.
Wow. Cool, man. Well, Dave, you are totally an inspiration to me, man. And I love listening to your podcast. I'm a fan. I learned so much from your podcasts, and I know so many people do. And so it's been an honor to have you on my podcast, man.
Love it, Guy. Thanks for putting this together, and I'm going to keep up with you as well. And I want to know one question for you before we get out of here.
Yeah, man.
Where's your next event? Are you with your music? I know you've got some good music going on.
Yeah. So I'm playing all over the place, but my next kind of shows are in this little surf town called Ventura, and so I'm doing some shows out there. A lot. Like I'm playing out there once or twice a month now with my little ska band.
Nice. Yeah, I love it, man. Ska. That's what we talked about last time, the ska. So this is great. So I'm gonna follow up with you. Next time we're down south, I'm gonna be hitting you up on the road.
For sure, man. That'd be awesome. We could go fish the surf too, over there and catch some Corbina,
Let's do that.
Right on, man. Well, Dave, we'll talk soon, huh?
All right. Thanks again, man. See ya.
All right, buddy. Bye-bye.
It's a Guy Jeans podcast.